She signed my name on the bankruptcy petition, filing it in the exact court where I work. She thought I was just the quiet clerk who stamps files. She didn't know I taped every piece of evidence to my own hearing schedule, waiting. When the judge asked her to swear to tell the truth, I knew that false affidavit was about to burn like a match hitting gasoline. My name is Emery Hernandez. I am 31 years old. My world is built on paper, procedure, and the quiet, final sound of a date stamp hitting an affidavit. I am a clerk at the Federal Court of the Commonwealth District. I don't work in the dramatic theaters of criminal law, with the shouting lawyers and the tearful juries. I work in the administrative trenches. I work in bankruptcy. Chapter 7. Chapter 13. The end of the line. I am surrounded by the ghosts of bad decisions and second mortgages. My desk, one of 4 in a partitioned gray square, is organized into precise stacks, petitions to dismiss, schedules of assets and liabilities, proofs of claim. I am a guardian of the docket, the one who ensures that when a life is legally dissolved, every T is crossed, every I dotted. The air in my cubicle smells permanently of aging toner, industrial strength carpet cleaner, and the faint, dusty sweetness of manila folders that haven't been opened since the 1990s. I thrive on this order. I find comfort in the binary nature of the law, filed or not filed, timely or untimely, truth or perjury. The interruption came not from the heavy mechanical chime of the courthouse bells, but from the thin digital vibration of my personal phone against the government-issued laminate desktop. It was 3:15 in the afternoon, a slow Tuesday. I glanced down. An email alert from my credit monitoring service, the one I paid $9.99 a month for. The subject line was offensively bright. Alert new bankruptcy filing. Detected under your name. My breath didn't catch. My stomach didn't drop. I simply stared at the screen for a full 3 seconds, processing the data. A mistake, a database error, someone with a similar name. Hernandez wasn't exactly rare, a mix-up with a social security number, perhaps a transposition of digits. It happened. I opened the email. It listed a case number, case 25-14992, CWH. My blood didn't run cold. It just focused. I turned to my left monitor, the one displaying the court's internal case management system. My fingers moved over the keyboard with the same steady, practiced rhythm they used 1,000 times a day. I bypassed the public access portal and went straight into the staff-level docketing index, the one that updates in real time. I typed in the case number, the screen refreshed, and there it was. Debtor Emery A. Hernandez. Case type. Chapter 7 Voluntary. Filed. 25. 10-31. 19. 42. E.S. Tyne, trustee assigned. R. Gideon, status, awaiting 341. Meeting, it wasn't a database error, it was my database. Someone had filed for bankruptcy as me, in my courthouse. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. It was like spray painting graffiti on the front door of a police station while the chief was watching from his window. I clicked the PDF icon for the full petition. The document loaded. 42 pages of fabricated ruin. The lawyer of record was listed Brock Vale LLP. My brow furrowed. Just slightly. Brock Vale. They were downtown. Glass tower. Expensive suits. They didn't do simple Chapter 7s. They handled complex corporate restructuring. Chapter 11s with 8-figure debts and creditors' committees in multiple states. They weren't the kind of firm you found on a bus stop advertisement. To see their name on a rush-filed, no-asset personal bankruptcy was like seeing a thoroughbred racehorse pulling a vegetable cart. It was wrong. It was loud. I scrolled to Schedule AB, the list of assets and liabilities. The listed address for the debtor for me was a penthouse apartment at Harbor Heights. Harbor Heights was the new, glittering glass tooth on the skyline, a place where the monthly condo fees were more than my semi-annual salary. I lived in a one-bedroom rental in Fairview, closer to the highway than the harbor, a place where the loudest noise was the neighbor's air conditioning unit. I did not panic. Panic is inefficient. Panic is sloppy. Panic is what the people filing these forms do right before they liquidate their assets to a cousin for $1. I am not those people. I kept my expression neutral, a mask honed by years of listening to desperate debtors beg for extensions I had no power to give. My colleagues were focused on their own screens, the rhythmic click-clack of their keyboards the only sound. I opened my second monitor. This one wasn't for the public docket. This was the back end. The server log, the staff-only intake registry that shows how a file arrived. Not just that it arrived, it records the digital fingerprints. I searched the timestamp, 1942, 7:42 p.m. Last night, the system recorded the electronic signature, the filing fee payment method, and the originating IP address. The fee was paid by a prepaid credit card, purchased with cash. No doubt, untraceable on its own, but the IP address was the mistake. It wasn't masked. It wasn't routed through 3 continents using a VPN. It was sloppy. It resolved to a public Wi-Fi network, Cafe Marigold. I leaned back in my chair. The old springs groaned in protest. A sound I knew well. Cafe Marigold. The place with the exposed brick, the $8 lavender lattes, and the little reclaimed wood tables perfect for staging photographs of new laptops and artisan pastries. The place my older sister, Vivian, posted on her Instagram feed at least 3 times a week. My heart, which had been beating at its standard 65 beats per minute, gave one solid, heavy thud, a single, muffled deflection against my ribs. Then it returned to normal. My job is to find the lies. I hunt for omissions in Schedule J, the monthly expenses. I cross-reference asset declarations in Schedule AB with state DMV records and property tax filings. I am a bloodhound for the inconsistencies that signal fraud. The people who file these forms are often desperate, sometimes stupid, but usually predictable. They hide the boat. They forget to list the second paycheck from the weekend job. They claim expenses for things they've never owned. This was different. This was predatory. This was precise. Vivian Carlisle, 34 years old, my only sibling. She'd shed the Hernandez name the moment she married her first husband, climbing into a new life and a new tax bracket. She was a self-proclaimed venture specialist, a consultant for emerging markets, all buzzwords that meant she was very good at spending other people's money. She moved through life like a high-end tornado, all flashing jewelry and expensive perfume, leaving a trail of exhausted credit lines and dazzled, temporary friends. I remembered Easter dinner. Just 6 months ago, my parents' house. Vivian had been holding court, describing some vague fintech synergy she was leveraging. My father hung on every word, captivated. My mother refilled her wine glass, beaming with a pride she never seemed to find for my steady government-issue career. I'd asked a simple question, something about the tax implications of her offshore setup. Vivian had laughed, a tinkling, brittle sound that always set my teeth on edge. "Oh, Emery, don't worry your pretty little head about it. It's all very high level, very complex." She'd patted my hand, her rings cold against my skin. "You just keep stamping those files. Someone has to do the boring work, right?" My mother had nodded in agreement. Vivian has always been the ambitious one. Emery just knows how to stamp things. I looked at the IP address on my screen. Cafe Marigold. I looked at the forged signature on the petition. A sloppy, hurried digital scrawl meant to mimic my handwriting. She thought I was just the girl who stamped the files. She thought I was the boring work. I minimized the federal docket. I minimized the intake log. The fluorescent lights of the clerk's office suddenly felt too bright, too sterile, buzzing with an energy I hadn't noticed before. I opened a new document on my personal drive, a drive firewalled from the court's network and encrypted twice. I created a new folder. I named it Casebook, V. Carlisle. Inside, I started the log. I saved the IP address. I saved the full PDF of the fraudulent filing. I screenshotted the intake timestamp and the details of the prepaid card transaction. I documented the name of the law firm, Brock Vale, and the assigned trustee. I gathered the digital breadcrumbs. My fingers were steady. There was no tremor, no rage, just a cold, clean alignment of purpose. The machine was waking up. I typed the first line into my private log. Attacker chose the wrong victim. The game begins. I sat at my desk for a full minute after closing the log. The air in the office felt thin. I pulled the fraudulent petition back up. This time not as a clerk, but as a forensic analyst. My mouse hovered over the last page, the signature block. It was a pathetic attempt. Emery A. Hernandez. The name was rendered in a shaky, thin line, the kind drawn with a mouse or a cheap stylus on a trackpad. It wasn't a certified digital signature. It wasn't even a good scan of a real one. It was a vector image, crude and uneven. The H in Hernandez was too sharp. The Z, a jagged lightning bolt. It screamed forgery. Vivian had always had terrible handwriting. But this was worse. This was lazy. This was arrogant. She was so certain I was just a paper pusher that she didn't even try to make it look real. I moved to the schedules, the meat of the filing. This was her story, the fiction she was presenting to the federal government. I started with Schedule EF, unsecured creditors. My eyes scanned the list. I didn't see my actual $200 limit gas card or my student loan, which I paid on time every month. Instead, I saw a revolving credit line with Northbridge Financial for $52,000. I saw an unsecured signature loan from Harborstone Trust for another $40,000. I'd never heard of either company. These were not the typical creditors of a 31-year-old court clerk. These were the creditors of a high flyer, someone living on leverage and air, someone like Vivian. She was dumping her secret debts onto my clean record. Then, the means test and Schedule I, the declaration of income. My jaw tightened. She had listed my profession as judicial consultant, contract basis, a meaningless, inflated title that sounded just plausible enough to explain the income she'd invented. She'd declared my average monthly income at a figure just over double what I actually earned. The number was specific, precise, and utterly false. She'd inflated my income to make the corresponding high-value debts seem plausible, to paint a picture of a high-earning consultant who had simply overextended and collapsed. It was a neat, tidy narrative. The final, fatal error was in Schedule AB, personal property, and Schedule C, property claimed as exempt. Tucked between used laptop and assorted clothing was a line item that made me stop. Item 11, ladies' timepiece. Solange Co. Starlight model. Value $18,900. She had listed it. She had actually listed the goddamn watch. And on Schedule C, she'd claimed its full value as exempt under the state's jewelry and personal effects wildcard exemption. I didn't own a watch. I used my phone. The only jewelry I owned was a pair of silver earrings my mother had given me for my college graduation, the ones Vivian later called quaint. This watch was Vivian's prize. She'd posted it on her Instagram story at least a dozen times. The diamond chips catching the light in a champagne flute. The logo always perfectly centered. She couldn't even commit fraud without boasting, without trying to find a way to legally shield her favorite toy within the very lie she was telling. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I took high resolution, secure screenshots of every single page. Page 1, with the Harbor Heights address, the signature page, the list of fake debts, the fabricated income, and especially the watch. I appended a digital timestamp to each image file, a function built into my private case software. Each file was encrypted and saved to the external hard drive I kept locked in my desk drawer, the one that never, ever connected to the court's network. I was building my own docket, exhibit by exhibit. The filing itself was one piece of the puzzle, the how was the other. I went back to the court's internal access log, the one that tracked pre-filing activity. A petition like this, 42 pages of detailed, if fabricated, financial data wasn't typed up in 5 minutes. It had to be prepared. I cross-referenced the IP address from Cafe Marigold. The log showed that the final submission packet was sent at 7:42 p.m., but the case creation, the initial opening of the blank e-file forms, had happened 2 hours earlier. A guest account, temporary and unregistered. had been created at 5:30 p.m. from the same IP block. Someone had sat in that cafe for over 2 hours, sipping their $8 latte, and meticulously constructed my financial ruin, uploading the faked pay stubs and the forged signature, Cafe Marigold. I pictured it, the exposed brick, the low-hanging Edison bulbs, and, near the cash register, a small, discreet brass plaque. I'd noticed it while picking up a coffee for a supervisor once. This area under 24-hour video surveillance for your safety. I had to move. The cafe, like most small businesses, probably looped their security footage every 48 or 72 hours. I had maybe a day. I couldn't use my court email. I couldn't call as Emery Hernandez. Clerk, that would be a procedural violation. An ethical breach that could poison the well. It would tip someone off. I had to be a ghost. I toggled to a private browser window and opened a new, anonymous email account. The name was generic. J. Smith, Legal, INQ. I composed a message to the general info address listed on Cafe Marigold's website, to the manager. I am writing with an urgent request to preserve video data from your security system. I was a customer in your establishment yesterday evening, October 31st. Between approximately 5 p.m. and 8 p.m., I was sitting at the two-top table by the window, near the wall outlet. I believe I may have left a personal document folder of significant importance on the table, and I'm trying to retrace my steps. The footage from that time frame would be invaluable. I will be filing a formal request with local authorities, but I am asking you as a courtesy to please secure and preserve the footage from those hours immediately, so it is not overwritten. Thank you for your immediate attention to this sensitive matter. It was a risk, a white lie, but it was a civilian request, plausible and non-threatening. I hit send. The trap was set. Now, for the motive. Why this apartment? Why Harbor Heights? I opened a public browser tab and navigated to Vivian's Instagram profile. It was public, of course. Vivian's life was a performance, and she needed an audience. I scrolled back, past the posts of champagne, past the inspirational quotes about hustle, past the selfies in expensive restaurant bathrooms, and there it was, posted just one day after the system log showed she created the draft filing. It was a photo of her hand, that same perfectly manicured hand, adorned with the Solange Camouflage watch, in her grasp, a set of shiny new keys attached to a heavy brass fob. The background was blurred, but the geotag was sharp and clear Harbor Heights. Her caption, finally got the keys to my new sanctuary, so excited for this next chapter, Blessed Harbor, Heights, New Beginnings, Luxury Living. The pieces snapped together with a cold, sickening click. She wasn't just listing the address, she was moving in. A place like Harbor Heights would have a rigorous credit and background check, a standard application. My sister, with her flashy lifestyle and hidden, toxic debts, would never have been approved. But a judicial consultant with a 6-figure income and a clean slate, that was a different story. She hadn't just filed as me, she'd become me, just long enough to pass the credit check and secure the lease. The bankruptcy filing, time-stamped just after the lease was likely signed, was the cleanup operation. It was designed to nuke the massive debts she'd racked up, perhaps co-signing as me, or by stealing my identity for the initial applications before the first statements even arrived. She was whitewashing her financial history using my name as the detergent. My first instinct, the clerk's instinct, was to run down the hall to the trustee's office, to flag the case, to file an immediate adversary proceeding, to motion for dismissal on grounds of fraud. I stopped my hand. I shut down the monitor. That's what she'd expect a normal person to do. A civilian. A victim. I am not a civilian. I am not a victim. I am the system she is trying to abuse. If I filed now, she would claim she was hacked. She would blame the high-powered, glass tower lawyers at Brock Vale, who would then claim a clerical error and withdraw the petition. It would become a messy civil dispute. She would walk away, her new apartment secured, and I would be left fighting to clear my name from the credit bureaus for the next 10 years. No. The filing was in the system, the machine was already running, and the machine has rules. The next mandatory step, already docketed, was the 341 meeting of creditors. In that meeting, the debtor, the person pretending to be Emery Hernandez, would be required to appear in person, raise their right hand, and swear under oath, before a federal trustee, that every single word in that 42-page petition was true. I looked at the date on my calendar. The meeting was scheduled in 3 weeks. I would not stop the filing. I would let it proceed. I would let her walk into that room. I would let her commit perjury, a federal felony, in a recorded proceeding. Her expensive lawyers would probably send a junior associate who wouldn't even know what she looked like. She would sit there, lie, and hang herself with federal law. The trap was laid. The evidence was secured. The rope was long enough. Now, I just needed one more thing. I needed the confession, not for the court, but for me. I needed to hear her say it, in her own arrogant, self-assured voice. I needed the final, personal piece of the puzzle, and I knew exactly how to get it. The call came on Thursday. My desk phone, the government line, rang at 4:55 p.m., just as I was logging the final disposition on a contested discharge. It was my mother. She never called the office. Her world was social, not functional. "Emery?" Her voice was high, tight, and unnervingly bright, the voice she used when she was managing an event, not speaking to family. "You're coming to dinner Friday, 7 p.m. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. "I have plans, Mom," I said, looking at the empty grid of my wall calendar. My only plan was to sort my laundry and read a trustee's brief. "Cancel them," she snapped, the brightness gone, replaced by the steel underneath. "Vivi has some wonderful news to share. We're celebrating. Don't be late." The line clicked. She didn't wait for a confirmation. The gavel had fallen. This was it. This was the moment I was waiting for. Vivian, bursting with the arrogance of her crime, would be unable to resist performing her victory. On Friday evening, I left the courthouse precisely at 5. I drove my 10-year-old beige sedan, the one with 142,000 miles on it, toward Fairview. Fairview was the neighborhood of my childhood, a place of manicured lawns and identical 2-story colonials. It was the place I had stayed, and the place Vivian had clawed her way out of. The car was reliable, completely paid off, and blended into every parking lot. It was the automotive equivalent of my career, and my sister despised it. I didn't park in the driveway. I parked 2 blocks away, under the dark canopy of a maple tree, whose leaves were already rotting into the curb. I sat for a full minute, the engine ticking as it cooled. I took one slow, measured breath, the air cold and tasting of damp earth. Then I picked up my personal phone. I opened the audio recording app I downloaded 3 days prior. It was simple, designed for students recording lectures. I had researched the statutes thoroughly. Our Commonwealth was a one-party consent state. As a participant in the conversation, my consent was the only one legally required. I was the one party. I pressed the small red circle on the screen. A digital timer appeared, ticking upward in silent, red numerals. 0:02. I adjusted my settings, ensuring the screen was black. I slid the phone, active and listening, into the breast pocket of my simple button-down shirt, the microphone facing out from the thin cotton. I walked up the concrete path I had walked thousands of times. The house was blazing with light, every window illuminated, as if welcoming royalty. My mother opened the door before I could ring the bell. "Emery, you're here?" The relief in her voice was palpable. My non-attendance would have been a social crisis, an imbalance in her tableau. "Take your coat. Hurry." She barely made eye contact, already turning her focus back to the dining room. Her arena. "Vivi is just telling your father about her new venture. It's marvelous." The smell hit me first. Not just the rich, heavy aroma of roasted garlic and thyme, but the sharp, expensive cloud of Vivian's perfume. It was the scent of arrogance, of money she hadn't earned. The dining room was a stage. This was not a Friday family dinner. This was a state function. My mother's prized white china, The set with the thin gold rim that we were forbidden to touch was laid out on a starched linen tablecloth. The heavy, antique silverware was aligned with regimental precision, and the crystal water goblets, the ones from her wedding, glinted under the full glare of the chandelier. My father was at the head of the table, his face a picture of rapt attention, and there, in the seat of honor, sat Vivian. She was glowing. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly car insurance. Her hair was perfect, and on her wrist, catching the light as she gestured, was the Solange Commerce watch, the $18,900 asset she had claimed as exempt, in my name. "Emery, you made it," Vivian smiled, a slow, condescending stretch of her lips. She raised her wineglass to me, a toast to the audience. "Perfect timing. I was just sharing my good news." "Your mother said," I replied. Pulling out the stiff-backed chair opposite her, I placed the linen napkin in my lap. The china plate felt cold and sterile beneath my hands. "Vivi is moving into Harbor Heights," my father boomed, his voice full of a pride he usually reserved for stock market gains. "Top floor. Can you imagine?" "It's just a little pied-à-terre, Daddy," Vivian demurred, waving her hand, the watch flashing a spectrum of light across the table. "A place to network, but that's not even the real news." She turned her gaze to me, her eyes bright and predatory. This was the moment. The performance was for my benefit. "The real news," she announced to the room, "is that I finally took care of your little financial situation. Emery, I've liberated you." The room was suddenly quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the kitchen appliances. My father nodded slowly, as if this were the most logical thing in the world. My mother, holding a platter of asparagus, froze, her expression one of pure, unadulterated adoration for her eldest child. I kept my voice perfectly level, neutral, the voice I use when asking a debtor to confirm the spelling of their name for the record. "Liberated me how?" "Vivian." Vivian took a delicate sip of her wine. She laughed, a light tinkling sound that always set my teeth on edge. It was the sound of dismissal. "Oh, you know, you're just so spectacularly bad with money. Darling, it's not your fault. You're just not built for it." She leaned forward, as if sharing a delicious secret with the whole table. "All those little debts you've racked up, the student loans, that awful high-interest gas card, it's impossible to get ahead. And frankly, it was becoming an embarrassment. How can I leverage my connections when my own sister is drowning?" I waited. The phone in my pocket was capturing every syllable, every condescending inflection. "So," she continued, sitting back with a look of profound magnanimity, "I did it for you. I took the bull by the horns. I hired Brock and Vale. They're the absolute best, absolute sharks, and I filed a Chapter 7 bankruptcy for you, wiped it all clean." She smiled, a triumphant, generous smile. "It's done. I just pinned all that messy, accumulated debt onto their legal team and let them handle the petition. All those balances are frozen. You're free. A clean slate." There it was, the confession. I filed it for you, clear, unambiguous, and delivered with the flourish of a magician revealing her trick. My father clapped his hands together, a soft, fleshy sound. "That's my Vivi, always so resourceful, always thinking outside the box, always looking out for her little sister." The old script, the one they had performed my entire life, Vivian, the golden child, the resourceful one. I, the lead-footed, practical, boring one, the project. I remembered begging for piano lessons after Vivian got a guitar. My father said it was too expensive. I remembered bringing home my acceptance to law school, a clerical program, not a JRD, but still, and my mother had said, "Oh, that's nice, dear," before asking Vivian about her weekend trip. For 31 years, I had lived with this dynamic. Vivian breaks the rules and is called innovative. I follow them to the letter and am called rigid. I let the silence hang for a beat. I watched her bask in our parents' approval. I picked up my water glass. The crystal was heavy, cut deep. "Vivian," I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through the self-congratulatory haze like a scalpel. Filing a petition with false information is a crime. Vivian's smile faltered. Just a fraction. Knowingly submitting a false declaration, under penalty of perjury, is a federal offense. My father frowned, his brow furrowing. Emery, don't use that legal jargon. It's confusing. Your sister did you a favor. It's not jargon, Dad. It's the law. I turned my gaze back to my sister. Concealing assets from the trustee, say, a watch worth nearly $19,000 is also a crime. Listing fraudulent debts to discharge them, that's bankruptcy fraud. Each count carries a penalty of up to 5 years in federal prison and a $250,000 fine. Vivian recovered. Her arrogance was a fortress, built and reinforced by our parents for 3 decades. She let out another little laugh. This one sharper, brittle. Oh, Emery, stop being so dramatic. Who is going to prove any of that? You. She leaned across the table, her eyes glittering with genuine amusement. You're just the girl who stamps the calendars. You're the help. You file what people tell you to file. You're a functionary. Honey, you don't make the rules. You just stamp them. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her, letting her words settle in the air, letting the recorder drink them in. You just stamp the calendars. I took a slow sip of water. The cold liquid felt good. The petition was filed electronically on Tuesday, October 31st. Vivian's hand, the one not holding the wine glass, the one resting on the white tablecloth, stopped moving. At 7:42 p.m., her eyes locked on mine. The smile was gone. It was filed, I continued, my voice still soft. From the public Wi-Fi network at the Café Marigold on 11th Street. She didn't move. She barely breathed. That's your favorite cafe, isn't it? I asked, as if genuinely curious. The one with the seasonal citrus candles. They're very strong, the scent of bergamot and mandarin. It's still on your jacket. It wasn't. I had no idea what her jacket smelled like, but it was a calculated guess, a procedural thrust, designed to provoke a reaction, and I got one. Vivian's face didn't crumple. She didn't gasp, but a switch flipped behind her eyes. The performance ended. The mask of the resourceful older sister vanished, replaced by a cold, hard appraisal. She had been caught, and she knew it. Her knuckles went white as she gripped the stem of her wine glass. She didn't speak. She just twisted her wedding ring, a sharp, repetitive, grinding motion against her finger. Click, click, click. My mother looked between us, her face a mask of sudden, profound confusion. What? What Café Vivi? What is Emery talking about? Vivian ignored her. She picked up the heavy wine bottle from the center of the table, her hand visibly unsteady, and poured her glass nearly to the brim. She drank half of it in one desperate, unladylike swallow. I placed my water glass down on the china saucer. The sound was quiet, but final. I had enough. I had the direct admission I filed it for you. I had the confirmation of her motive and her arrogance. You're just the girl who stamps the calendars. And now, I had her silent. Physical confession, the twisting ring, and the desperate gulp of wine. I reached into my breast pocket, my thumb finding the small, indented button on the side of the phone. I pressed it. The small red timer stopped. The recording was saved, locked, and already uploading to the secure cloud server I had prepared. The indirect admission was secured. The rest of this dinner would be a suffocating performance of denial, and I had no interest in the second act. I folded my linen napkin and placed it neatly beside my plate. I have to go, I said, pushing my chair back. I have an early shift tomorrow. Emery, you just got here, my mother protested, her voice rising in panic. We haven't even served the main course. I looked at my sister. Her eyes were fixed on me, cold and full of a new, unfamiliar hatred. I'm not hungry, I said, and I walked out of the room, leaving the sound of the clinking crystal behind me. I left my parents' house at 7:30 p.m. I did not go home. I drove to the 24-hour branch of my bank. using the brightly lit ATM. I changed my PINs on all 3 of my accounts. Then I drove home, locked my door, and sat at my laptop until 3 in the morning, not with rage, but with a cold, meticulous purpose. First, the personal defenses, the firewall. I went to the websites of all 3 major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. For each, I initiated a full credit freeze. This would lock my file, making it impossible for anyone, including Vivian, to open new lines of credit in my name. Then, I placed an extended fraud alert on my file, one that would last for 7 years. Finally, I filed an official identity theft victim report with the FTC. The system spat out a reference number. I saved it. I changed every significant password I owned, using a random generator to create 48-character strings of alphanumeric nonsense that I would never remember. They were saved only in the encrypted password manager on my firewalled drive, my social media, my bank, my utilities, my personal email, and most importantly, my internal access credentials for the courthouse network. By 4 a.m., Emery Hernandez, the civilian, was locked down. At 7:30 a.m., I was at my desk, half an hour before my shift officially began. The office was quiet, smelling of stale coffee and floor wax. I logged in with my new credentials. My first action was not to check the docket, but to draft a new document. I opened the internal human resources portal and found Form 77B Disclosure of Conflict of Interest. I began to type, Employee Emery A. Hernandez, Position Docket Clerk, Grade 9, Subject Case 25-14992, CWH, Debtor Emery A. Hernandez. In the description field, I wrote with practice neutrality. The undersigned employee has become aware of a petition filed in the employee's name. The petition appears to be a fraudulent filing and an instance of identity theft. The potential perpetrator is known to the employee. To avoid any appearance of impropriety, prejudice, or unauthorized influence, the undersigned hereby recuses herself from any and all official duties, access, or administrative actions related to this specific case file. Effective immediately, all further inquiries should be directed to the clerk of court. I signed it digitally. I routed it to my direct supervisor and to the clerk of court's office. The send button clicked with a quiet finality. I had just built a wall between myself and my own case. I was now, officially, just another victim. I could no longer access the file, not even to look at it. This was not a setback. This was a strategy. I had already downloaded and secured every page of the original filing. Now, my actions would be pristine. No one could ever accuse me of using my position to tamper with the evidence. My next step was to activate the system. I had spent the weekend compiling the evidence into what we call a trustee's packet. It was a clean, logical, indexed presentation of facts. Exhibit A, the full 42-page fraudulent petition. Exhibit B, a high-resolution scan of my actual driver's license signature, contrasted with the crude, mouse-drawn forgery on the petition. Exhibit C, my last 6 pay stubs from the U.S. courts, contrasted with the fabricated judicial consultant income schedule. Exhibit D, the server log printout showing the Cafe Marigold IP address and the 7:42 p.m. filing timestamp. Exhibit E, a printout of Vivian's public Instagram post from the following day, geotagged at Harbor Heights, displaying both the keys and the $18,900 Solange Copeau watch. Exhibit F, the audio file from Friday night's dinner, saved as V. Carlisle, admission, AUD, burned to a physical CD and also on an encrypted USB stick. I had transcribed the key phrases. I filed a Chapter 7 bankruptcy for you. I just pinned all that messy, accumulated debt onto their legal team. Who is going to prove any of that? You're just the girl who stamps the calendars. I placed these materials into a heavy 9 by 12-inch manila envelope. I did not send this through the interoffice mail. I was on my lunch break at 11 a.m. I walked 2 blocks, out of the courthouse and into the adjacent federal building. I took the elevator to the 9th floor. to the offices of the Federal Insolvency Oversight Unit, the FIOU. This was our district's name for the U.S. Trustee Program, the division of the Department of Justice tasked with overseeing the bankruptcy system and, more importantly, prosecuting fraud. I did not ask to see the trustee. I did not give my name. I handed the sealed, labeled packet to the intake paralegal, a man I recognized from hearings but did not know personally. This is an evidence packet for Case 25-14992, CWH, I said, using my customer service voice. It is being submitted by the victim of the fraudulent filing. He took the packet, stamped it, received, and handed me a receipt. I nodded, turned, and walked out. The first gear was now engaged. The FIOU was the big gear. It would turn slowly, but it would crush everything in its path. Back at my desk, I began the peripheral work. The packet to the FIOU would handle the bankruptcy fraud, but the identity theft, the forged documents, the potential bank fraud she'd used to secure the Harbor Heights lease, that was a separate matter. I opened my secure case file. I had already done the basic financial forensics. Vivian wasn't just using my identity. In the fake petition, she had listed two major creditors I had never heard of: Northbridge Financial and Harborstone Trust. Using public record search tools, I found that Northbridge was a high-risk lender specializing in short-term business capital. Harborstone was a private wealth trust. These were not places a court clerk interacts with. This led to a chilling hypothesis: she hadn't just listed fake debts. She had likely incurred those debts, totaling over $90,000, using my identity first. The bankruptcy was the cleanup, the discharge phase of her plan. I checked the timestamp on the petition again. The draft was created at 5:30 p.m., the filing submitted at 7:42 p.m. I went back to Vivian's Instagram, the Harbor Heights post. I looked at the metadata I had managed to pull. The photo was taken at 6:05 p.m. A new timeline formed. She secured the lease at Harbor Heights, likely signing the final papers that evening. She went to the parking garage. I made a call to the Harbor Heights garage public line. Posing as a potential resident, I confirmed their visitor parking was automated, pay by card only. With electronic receipts, a record would exist. She swiped her card. Then she drove to Cafe Marigold, sat down at 5:30, and began drafting the petition to erase the financial history that had just gotten her the apartment. But what about the other victims, the watch, the Solange Co. Starlight model? She had claimed it as my asset to exempt it, but I knew she'd owned it for at least a year. How did she pay for it? I began digging into public lawsuit filings. I searched Vivian Carlisle. Nothing. V. Carlisle Holdings. Nothing. Then I searched the watchmaker. Solange Co. Cross-referenced with fraud or theft. A hit. A small claims suit filed 6 months ago. Dismissed for lack of service. The plaintiff's name was Quinn Hale. The complaint alleged Vivian Carlisle had purchased high-value jewelry using a shared business account without authorization. The case was dropped, but the name was now in my file. I began to build a new spreadsheet, a matrix. Column A, Vivian Carlisle. Column B, Emery Hernandez, Victim 1. Column C, Quinn Hale, Potential Victim 2. Column D, Northbridge, Financial Potential Victim 3. Column E, Harborstone Trust. Potential Victim 4. She wasn't just a thief. She was a serial identity predator. This was bigger than the FIOU. I compiled a second, parallel evidence packet. This one was leaner. It focused on the multiple victim angle, the identity theft, and the clear financial crimes. I labeled this one for the Financial Crimes Task Cell, a multi-agency group that operated out of the regional U.S. Attorney's Office. This packet I sent via certified mail from a post office 5 miles from my home. The second gear was engaged. While I was there, I sent a third, separate letter. This one was to the manager of Cafe Marigold. It was a formal-sounding, notarized request from Emery A. Hernandez, private citizen, formally requesting the preservation of video data from October 31st, between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m., citing pending litigation. This, combined with my anonymous email, would be enough to make any sane manager lock that footage down. That evening, My phone buzzed. A text from my father. Your mother told me what you said. You need to be more flexible. Emery, families have to bend for each other. This legal nonsense is a misunderstanding. Vivian is sorting it. Flexibility, the word our family used to mean, let Vivian get away with it. The key word for systematic error, for covering up the broken parts. I typed one reply. Do not co-sign or sign any document Vivian brings to you. Do not give her any money. I am handling this. His reply was almost instant. This is not how we do things. You are being cold. I powered off the phone. I put it in a drawer. I would not be swayed. The next 2 weeks were a study in agonizing. Controlled patience. I went to work. I stamped files. I processed Chapter 13s. I checked dockets for other people. My fingers moving with the same efficiency. I was the gray mouse in the gray cubicle. A perfect functionary. No one in my office knew that my entire life had been detonated, or that I was the one holding the trigger for the controlled demolition. I watched the public docket for my case. Case 25-14992, CWHEI, using the public access terminal in the courthouse lobby during my lunch break. I could not use my credentials, but the lobby computer was for anyone. On Monday, the FIOU filed a notice of appearance. They were in on Tuesday. The trustee, R. Gideon, filed the formal Notice of 341 Meeting of Creditors. The date was set, November 28th, the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. I went back to my desk. I opened my personal paper calendar, the one with pictures of national parks that my supervisor gave me for Christmas. I found November. I drew a neat black box around the number 28. I did not write my hearing. I did not write justice. I wrote 341 meeting, 10:00 a.m., room 4B. Debtor must appear and testify under oath. The pawn had moved all the way across the board. The system was now just waiting for her to step on the final square and declare herself a queen. November 28th, the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, the air in the city had turned sharp, brittle, and cold. The kind of cold that seeps through wool coats. I took a personal day. I logged it in the system as Family Matters, which felt appropriate. I did not go to my cubicle on the 6th floor. I took the public elevator to the 4th floor, to the wing that housed the meeting rooms. Room 4B was not a courtroom. It had none of the gravitas, none of the dark wood or high ceilings. It was a purely functional space, designed for bureaucratic processing. It had beige walls, a scuffed gray carpet, and a long laminate conference table that seated 12. At the front, there was a slightly raised dais for the trustee. A cheap, plastic clock on the wall hummed, its second hand moving in precise, agonizing clicks. The 341 Meeting of Creditors is the cattle call of bankruptcy. I entered at 9:40 a.m., and the room was already half full of debtors, their lawyers, and the occasional creditor representative. They all wore the same expression of anxiety and exhaustion. I was just another face in the crowd. I took a seat in the last row, against the back wall, directly in the sightline of the debtor's chair. I opened my case file, a blank one I'd brought from home, and placed it in my lap. I was invisible. At 10:01, R. Gideon, the trustee, entered. I knew Gideon. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 50s, who had seen every lie a debtor could invent. He nodded to the FIOU attorney, a woman I didn't recognize, which was good already seated at his table. At 10:03, Vivian arrived. She was not dressed for a bankruptcy hearing. She was dressed for a hostile takeover. She wore a sharp navy blue pantsuit, heels that clicked with authority on the cheap linoleum, and the Solange Compagnie watch, flashing defiantly on her wrist. She was a panther in a room full of stray cats. She was flanked by a young man from Brock Vale. He looked 28. His suit was immaculate, and his eyes were glued to his smartphone. He was here to check a box on a simple Chapter 7, earn a quick fee, and get back to his real clients. We will call the case of Emery A. Hernandez, 25-13992, Gideon announced, his voice flat. The young lawyer looked up, startled. That's us. He nudged Vivian. They moved to the table. Vivian sat in the debtor's chair, facing Gideon. She crossed her legs, the picture of unbothered confidence. She hadn't scanned the audience. She hadn't seen me. "Please state your name for the record," Gideon said, looking at Vivian. "Emery A. Hernandez," Vivian replied. Her voice was clear, crisp, and utterly false. "The first act of perjury. And counselor, your appearance. Samuel Vale, Jr., for Brock and Vale, representing the debtor. Ms. Hernandez," Gideon said. "Please raise your right hand." Vivian raised her right hand, the sleeve of her suit jacket pulling back to reveal the diamond chip watch. "Do you swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge?" "I do." The second act of perjury. Gideon put on his reading glasses and looked down at the petition. "My petition, the one I had secured 2 weeks ago." "Counselor, a statement on the case." The young lawyer stood, though it wasn't necessary. "Mr. Trustee, this is a standard. No asset. Chapter 7. The debtor, Ms. Hernandez, is a judicial consultant who incurred significant, unsecured liabilities due to a series of unforeseen personal and medical hardships, compounded by a downturn in her contract-based business. The unforeseen circumstances script, the lie was smooth, practiced." Gideon nodded, then turned his gaze to Vivian. "Ms. Hernandez, did you review this petition and all its schedules before it was filed?" "Yes, I did." Lie number 3. "And are all the assets, debts, and declarations herein true and accurate?" "Yes." Lie number 4. Gideon leaned forward. "I see here on Schedule AB, you have listed your personal property. You state you own miscellaneous clothing valued at $500 and a used laptop valued at $300. "That's correct." "So, you are swearing today, under oath, that this is a complete and accurate list of all your personal property?" "Yes." Lie number 5. Gideon paused. He looked up, over his glasses, directly at Vivian. "Ms. Hernandez, where is the watch you are currently wearing?" The hum of the clock suddenly seemed deafening. Vivian's eyes widened, just a fraction. She instinctively touched the watch on her left wrist. The young lawyer from Brock Vale looked from Gideon to Vivian, his face a mask of sudden confusion. "The watch," Vivian stammered, her composure cracking for the first time. "The watch," Gideon repeated, his voice dangerously patient. "The timepiece on your wrist. It appears to be a Solange & Company Starlight model. Our research indicates a value of approximately $18,900. Why was this asset not listed on Schedule AB?" The room was silent. I could feel the eyes of every other debtor fixed on my sister. The young lawyer stood up, shuffling his papers. "Mr. Trustee, this is a simple, perhaps an oversight, An oversight of an asset worth nearly $19,000 is not an oversight, counselor," Gideon said, his voice hardening. "It is a concealment." Vivian found her voice. It was the same one she used on our parents, pleading, yet firm. "It's not mine." "It is not yours," Gideon repeated, not as a question, but as a statement. "No," Vivian said, gaining confidence. "It was borrowed. It belongs to a friend. I borrowed it for an event." "I see." Gideon leaned back, clasping his hands. He looked at the FIOU attorney. She nodded, ever so slightly. "And what is the name of this generous friend?" Gideon asked. "Who lends out $19,000 watches?" Vivian hesitated. The trap was sprung, and she had to walk deeper into it. "Her name is Quinn Hale." The young lawyer's face went pale. He had heard the name, but it was the attorney from the FIOU who spoke. "Mr. Trustee," the FIOU lawyer said, her voice clear and carrying to the back wall. "We find that answer particularly compelling. The name Quinn Hale is the lead complainant in an active federal wire fraud investigation, Case 75 CR 881. The Brockvale lawyer looked like he'd been struck. The FIOU lawyer continued, her eyes fixed on Vivian. An investigation in which the primary person of interest is not Emery Hernandez, but a woman named Vivian Carlisle, who we believe is sitting at this table, committing perjury. Right now. Vivian. Carlisle, the young lawyer whispered, staring at his client. Vivian turned. Her eyes, wide with pure, animal panic, scanned the audience. She was looking for an exit, a friendly face, a lifeline. And then she found me. Her gaze locked onto mine. The blood drained from her face. She saw the blank case file in my lap. She saw my neutral expression. She saw the girl who stamps the files, sitting in the back row, watching the machine she had built just for her. Gideon raised his hand, cutting off the lawyer's frantic sputtering. "This proceeding is suspended," he announced, his voice booming in the small room. Vivian stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Emery!" she shouted. "Emery, you have to stop this. Tell them—" I did not move. I did not blink. "Based on the testimony provided here under oath," Gideon declared, his voice overriding hers, "and the evidence of identity theft, concealment of assets, and perjury, this office is referring this matter immediately to the United States Attorney for Criminal Prosecution. This hearing is concluded." He struck the small wooden block on his desk. The sound was flat, dull, and final. Two federal marshals, who had been standing by the door, moved forward. They did not move toward me. They moved toward my sister. I looked up at the cheap plastic clock on the wall. It was 10:17 a.m. The gears, which had been slowly turning for weeks, had just locked into place. As I stood to leave, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out in the hallway. As the marshals spoke quietly to Vivian and her dumbstruck lawyer, it was a text from my father. "We are at the courthouse. We heard there was a meeting. This has gone too far. Emery, you are going to ruin this family. Stop this now." I deleted the text. I turned left, away from the elevators, and took the stairs down to the ground floor. My footsteps the only sound in the concrete well. That night, I drove to a 24-hour superstore. I did not buy groceries. I went to the office supply aisle and purchased a small, gray metal box with a key lock. At home, I took the encrypted USB drive from my desk, the drive that contained the IP logs, the financial comparisons, the forged signature, the Instagram posts, and the audio file of a dinner party that felt like it happened a lifetime ago. I placed the USB drive into the foam slot inside the box. I printed a small, white label from my label maker, Hernandez Car V.1. I closed the lid. The click of the lock was satisfying. The evidence was contained. My personal casebook was closed. Just as I was putting the box on my bookshelf, my phone lit up with an Instagram notification. Vivian was live. I tapped the screen. Her face appeared, blurry and too close to the camera. She was in the dark, in the leather-seated interior of her car. She was trying to smile, but her upper lip was twitching. Hey everyone," she whispered, her voice watery. "I just wanted to check in. There's just some crazy stuff happening right now. A huge administrative error, a misunderstanding. It's all going to be sorted out. My lawyers they're handling it. Everything is fine." She reached up to push her hair back, to smooth the facade, and I saw it, her hand. It wasn't the confident, manicured hand that held the champagne flute. It was trembling. A fine, uncontrollable, high-frequency tremor that she couldn't hide from the camera. She wasn't fine. She was terrified. I watched for one more second, then closed the app. That tremor wasn't just fear of what had happened. It was a premonition, a forecast of what was still to come. The referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office changed everything. The silence that followed was not one of inaction. It was the silence of a much larger, heavier machine beginning to move. My role officially shifted from activist to victim witness. I was now copied on procedural emails, a CC on the storm I had unleashed. The first major update arrived in my secure inbox, not from the FIOU, but from an assistant U.S. attorney. The subject line was just the case number. The body was terse, professional, and terrifyingly efficient. Ms. Hernandez, for your records, we have successfully executed the preservation order and received the following evidence. Attached was a video file. Marigold, extinct 1. I double-clicked. My screen filled with the familiar, hipster-chic interior of the cafe, filmed in grainy, high-contrast black and white from a camera mounted above the doorway. The timestamp in the corner read, October 31st, 5:32 p.m., and there she was, Vivian, not the panicked, trembling woman from the live stream, but the arrogant, confident predator from my dining room. She was at the window table, just as I'd guessed. Her laptop was open. She was focused, typing, a picture of diligence. She took a sip of her latte. Then, she moved the cup. She placed it directly on top of a small stack of papers to her right. The camera angle was high, but the text was just large enough. The top document, the one her coffee cup was now resting on, was printed in a bold, clear, government-issued font. Schedule AB property. My breath hitched. It was the digital fingerprint confirmed by a physical one. She wasn't just at the cafe. She was working on the petition, using the hard copies as a reference, sipping her latte as she systematically constructed my ruin. But that wasn't all. The email chain continued. The AUSA had moved with blinding speed. Subpoenas had been issued, not just to the cafe but to the banks. The file from Harborstone Trust was the second attachment. It wasn't a complex legal brief. It was a single-page printout of a bank transfer. Date October 29th, 2 days before the bankruptcy filing. From Harborstone Trust, Act T, ending 9022, to V, Carlyle Holdings, LLC, Act T, ending 45551. Amount $60,000. She had liquidated the very account that was one of her largest debts. She drained $60,000 from the trust, transferred it to her own personal shell company V. Carlyle Holdings, a name that appeared nowhere in my faked petition, and then, 48 hours later, filed a bankruptcy petition in my name, claiming the now empty Harborstone account as a massive, unpayable debt. It was no longer just concealment of an asset. This was active, premeditated fraud. This was theft. The evidence piled up, each email a new shovelful of dirt on the grave she had dug. The AUSA's office had pulled the server logs from the new email address she had created, the one she'd used to impersonate me. There it was, in black and white, sent from Emery, Hernandez, personal, to the collections departments of both Northbridge Financial and Harborstone Trust. The subject, amicable settlement proposal. She had written to them, as me. She'd offered them 10 cents on the dollar, a one-time payment of $5,000 to settle the $52,000 Northbridge matter, claiming she was facing a personal crisis and wished to avoid the unpleasantness of court. This was her plan. She tried to settle the massive debts she'd racked up in my name for pennies, pretending to be me. When they refused to bite, which they obviously had, she simply moved to Phase 2, burned the entire identity down in a federal bankruptcy filing. That night, I didn't sleep. The scope of it was suffocating. This was not a moment of sisterly spite. This was a calculated, multi-stage financial assault. The AUSA called me the next morning. Not an email. A call. Ms. Hernandez, this is AUSA Fletcher. We pulled the location data from Ms. Carlyle's phone, corresponding to the 2 weeks prior to the filing. Okay, I said, my voice quiet. I was at home, standing in my kitchen, staring at the peeling linoleum. She wasn't just at the cafe. Her phone shows 3 separate visits to a facility in Riverton, a place called Riverton Storage. Each visit was for less than 15 minutes. The last one was the morning of the filing. A storage unit. The classic move. The place debtors hide the assets that won't fit in a safe. We executed a warrant on the unit listed under her shell company's name an hour ago, Fletcher continued, his voice devoid of emotion. You were correct. The multi-victim hypothesis is confirmed. I sat down. What did you find? 9 unopened designer handbags, brands I can't pronounce, 4 more luxury watches, including 2 men's models, stacks of high-value gift cards, still in their packaging, totaling over $12,000. My mind reeled, but Fletcher wasn't finished. The real prize was the paperwork we found in a file box with the bags, receipts, Ms. Hernandez, the receipts for almost all of it, and none of them are in your name, or hers. Quinn Hale, I whispered. You got it, he said, a note of surprise in his voice. Receipts for nearly $30,000 in merchandise, all billed to Quinn Hale. We now have a pattern. She uses one victim's identity to acquire assets, then stores them, then uses a different victim's identity to clear the corresponding debt. Your name was just the one she pulled for the cleanup. After I hung up, I sat in the silence, the sheer complexity of her crimes settling on me, on impulse. I pulled up my digital copy of the petition, the one I had saved on my private drive. I looked past the main schedules, past the forged signature. I went to the administrative pages, the ones I'd barely glanced at, and I saw it, buried at the very end, an addendum. Application to waive, Chapter 7. Filing fee. The filing fee for a Chapter 7 is $338, a pittance, especially for someone who had just hidden $60,000. But Vivian was greedy and arrogant. She couldn't resist one more small, petty theft. She had filed the application in my name, claiming Emery Hernandez was too poor to afford the court fee. And as proof of income, she had attached a set of faked pay stubs from her fictitious judicial consultant job, pay stubs that, unlike the ones she'd described in the petition, showed zero income for the last 60 days. She had filed 2 contradictory sets of financial data, under oath, in the same petition, one to justify her high debts, and one to avoid a $300 fee. The brazen, stupid avarice of it made me sick. I scanned the document and emailed it to Fletcher. Found this, another false declaration, filed under penalty of perjury. His reply came back in less than 5 minutes. This is obstruction. She is actively lying to the court to gain a pecuniary advantage. We are adding 2 counts, false declaration in connection with a case, and obstruction of proceedings. The case was no longer a simple fraud filing. It was a multi-count federal indictment in the making. The backlash from my family was immediate. The AUSA's office must have contacted her lawyer with the new charges. That night, an email from my father landed in my inbox. Subject: you have to stop this. Emery, I am begging you. Your mother is a wreck. You are using your job to destroy your sister. Whatever this misunderstanding is, you must withdraw the complaint. Let the family handle this. We will have Vivian pay back the money. This is a private matter. The old words, flexibility, family, private matter, the velvet-gloved words they used to muzzle me, to hide the rot. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking. I thought of the video. I thought of the $60,000. I thought of Quinn Hale's name on the receipts. I typed one sentence. The law will do its job. I hit send. I turned off my computer. The apartment was too quiet. The information was too much. A buzzing, chaotic cloud in my head. I needed to see it. I went to my desk and pulled out a stack of colored sticky notes. I walked to the largest empty wall in my living room. I pulled the metal case Hernandez Car V1 from my shelf. I began to build the board. I used red notes for motive. One went up Harbor Heights lease, another $60,000 asset transfer, another luxury goods watches bags. I used yellow notes for opportunity method, Cafe Marigold IP address, stolen SSN identity, Shellco V. Carlisle Holdings, Emery Hernandez personal email. I used green notes for direct evidence. Audio, I filed it for you. Video schedule AB on table. Forged signature mouse drawn. Emails to creditors as Emery. Storage unit receipts Quinn Hale. Contradictory fee waiver. I stood back. It was a constellation of fraud, shining in bright, terrible colors on my beige wall. As I looked, I saw a gap. She was good, but she wasn't this good. She wouldn't know how to create the fake loan application documents from Northbridge, or how to generate the hyper-realistic consultant pay stubs. She had to have help. I went back to my drive, pulling up the original loan applications she'd filed in my name, the ones the AUSA had subpoenaed from the creditors. I scanned the fine print, the broker information, the underwriting sign-offs. There. 2 names I hadn't even registered. Lost in the sea of data. A loan broker, a small-time operator named Sal Genna. He had signed off on my income verification for the Northbridge loan. He had to have known it was fake. And a freelance accountant, a woman named Rita Sands. Her digital signature was on the certified PL statement for my consulting business that was submitted to Harborstone. They were soft accomplices, cogs in her machine, probably paid a few $100s in cash to look the other way and sign the forms. I took a black marker. I drew 2 new lines branching out from Vivian's central note. I added 2 new notes. Sal Genna. Rita Sands. The web was complete. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the wall. It was no longer a personal betrayal. It was a case. It was a set of facts. It was an objective, undeniable structure of lies. I took one last, plain white card. I wrote a single sentence on it and pinned it directly in the center of the web, right over Vivian's name. The day in court will not be about her. It will be about the truth. The search warrant for the Harbor Heights penthouse was issued on a Wednesday. AUSA Fletcher informed me via a single-sentence email. It was a formality, a courtesy to the victim of record. I was not there when they breached the door at 6 a.m. I was at my apartment, drinking black coffee, reading the morning briefs for my own cases. My ethical firewall was absolute. The disclosure I filed had walled me off from all official action regarding Case 25-14992 CWH. I could not access the file using my credentials. I could not pull the internal logs. I could not speak to the assigned judge or her staff. I was, in the eyes of the court, a stranger to my own case. This was the only way. I had fed the machine, and now I had to step back and let it run. That day, I worked the afternoon shift. I clocked in at 12:55 p.m. The courthouse felt exactly the same. The great marble lobby was quiet, vast, and cool. Sunlight streamed through the high, arched windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air. The faint, familiar smell of floor polish and old paper was comforting. I sat at my cubicle. The stack of files on my left was high. I took the first one. In Re Peterson. Chapter 13. Motion to modify plan. I reviewed the dates. I checked the signatures. I logged the receipt. I picked up my heavy, black date stamp. I inked it. I brought it down on the cover page. Clack. The sound was solid. Final. I put the file in the processed tray. I took the next file. In Re Anson Mills. Chapter 7. Debtor's Certification of Financial Management Course. I checked the certificate number. Clack. The great, indifferent wheels of justice turned, one stamped paper at a time. My personal life was a wildfire. But in this building, I was not a victim. I was not a sister. I was a functionary. A small, reliable gear. The rhythm of the work was a shield. Clack, clack, clack. During my 4:15 break, I sat in the windowless cafeteria, nursing a stale coffee. I opened the local newspaper's website on my phone. The story was there, buried below the fold of the digital front page. Prominent local businesswoman investigated for financial irregularities. They didn't use her name, not yet. But they described a self-styled venture consultant and mentioned allegations of fraudulent filings in the federal bankruptcy system. They referenced a multi-agency task force and potential identity theft. The whispers had started. The circle was tightening. When I returned to my desk, my personal phone, which I kept silent in my bag, was vibrating. I pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. "You are killing Mom. You are tearing this family to pieces just because you were jealous. You will destroy everything. Stop this. Tell them it was a mistake. Vivian." The warrant must have finally broken through her wall of arrogance. The terror was setting in. I did not reply. I did not feel anger. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt nothing at all. It was just more data. I took a precise screenshot of the text message, capturing the unknown number and the timestamp. I opened my email. I composed a new message to Asa Fletcher. Subject: witness intimidation, tampering, v. Carlisle. 1628. I attached the image. I wrote nothing in the body. I hit send. His reply came back in less than 1 minute. Received. When I got home at 9 p.m., an envelope was taped to my apartment door. My mother's handwriting, sharp and perfect, was on the front. Emery. I unlocked my door, dropped my bag, and opened it under the harsh light of my kitchen. It was not a letter. It was a note, scrawled on her thick, cream-colored, monogrammed stationery. Emery, your father and I don't understand these legal things, but we understand family. A family must be flexible. What Vivian did, she did because she was trying to help you. You are putting cold, hard rules above your own blood. That is not how we raised you. This is wrong. You must find a way to stop this. Family must always come before the law. Please, be flexible. Flexible, the word that meant, let Vivian win. The family motto, our password for ignoring the truth. The word they used to justify a lifetime of imbalance. I read the note twice. I did not tear it up. I did not cry. My hand was perfectly steady. I walked to my desk. I took a clean, 9 by 12-inch manila envelope from my office supply drawer. I slid the note inside. I picked up a black marker. I wrote clearly on the tab, Exhibits Family Pressure Context. I placed this new envelope in the locked metal box, right next to the USB drive labeled Hernandez Car V/1. It was just more evidence. The apartment felt small. The walls were thin. My diagram of sticky notes seemed to throb in the silence. I couldn't stay inside. I put on my running shoes and a warm coat. I walked out into the cold night air. I didn't have a destination. I just walked, my footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalks. I walked for miles, past the closed shops, under the buzzing, yellow streetlights, until I reached Stilling Pond. It was a man-made reservoir at the edge of the city, a place I never went. The wind was sharp, cutting across the flat expanse of the water. It smelled like cold iron and damp concrete. I stood at the concrete barrier. The water was black, like polished obsidian, like ink. It reflected nothing. The city lights were a distant, hazy glow on the horizon. It was quiet, not a peaceful quiet, but a thick, heavy, pressurized silence. The silence of the air just before the thunder cracks. I stood there, my hands deep in my pockets, and I practiced. I assumed they would call me to the stand. I would be a witness. I had to be ready. I whispered the words to the black water. Yes, that is my name. No, that is not my signature. No, I do not own a residence at Harbor Heights. No, I do not own a Solange & Company watch. No, I did not authorize anyone to file this petition on my behalf. Simple, declarative, facts. I looked at the faint outline of my own shadow on the pavement. I had to ask myself the question, the one my father's email and my mother's note had begged. Was this revenge? Revenge is hot. It is emotional. It is chaotic and messy. I looked at my evidence box. I thought of my color-coded wall. I thought of the ethical firewall I had built. This was not messy. This was an equation. This was a procedure. Vivian, in her arrogance, had initiated a formal process in my world. She had started the machine. I was not destroying her. I was simply refusing to stop the machine she had turned on. This was not revenge. It was compliance. I turned and walked home. I got into bed at 1 a.m. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. I fell asleep instantly. I slept for 5 hours. A deep, solid, dreamless black. I did not dream of Vivian's face in the courtroom. I did not dream of my mother's letter. I heard only one sound, repeating in the void, the clean, solid, mechanical clack of my date stamp hitting paper. Clack, clack, clack. When the alarm rang, I was awake before it finished its first chime. I got up, I made my coffee, I pulled my white button-down work shirt from the closet, I set up the ironing board. I filled the iron with water. I waited for it to heat. I pressed the collar, making the points sharp. I pressed the cuffs. I pressed the placket. My routine was my armor. Habit was my shield. I dressed in my simple work clothes, tied my hair back into a severe, functional bun, and put on my sensible shoes. I was the clerk. I was the functionary. I was the girl who stamped the files. I arrived at my desk at 7:45 a.m. I logged into my terminal. Before opening my work queue, I opened the public-facing docket portal. I typed in the case number, 25-14992, CWH. The page loaded. The status had changed. Overnight, the U.S. Attorney, on behalf of the trustee, had filed a formal adversary proceeding. The status, which had been referred to U.S. Attorney, was now a single, hard, red word, contested. A new date was on the calendar, a judicial hearing. The machine was ready for its next phase. Courtroom 12B was a different world. It was 2 floors above the administrative meeting rooms, but it felt miles away. A fortress of dark-stained mahogany and heavy, red velvet curtains. The air was still, heavy with the institutional smell of old books and floor wax. The Great Seal of the United States was carved in wood. High above the judge's bench, a constant, silent reminder of the power in this room. I sat in the 3rd row, on the left, blending in with the other spectators, law students, and off-duty attorneys. My black blazer and simple gray skirt were a uniform of invisibility. I was just another face, another observer of the docket. At 10 a.m., the door to the side of the bench opened. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Miriam Lake entered, her black robes flowing. She was a woman in her late 60s with a reputation for surgical precision and zero tolerance for theatricality. She did not waste time. "Calling case 25-14992, CWH, in Re Hernandez," the clerk announced, "and the related matter, 25 CR 901 United States v. Carlisle." AUSA Fletcher was already at the prosecution's table, his files arranged in neat, identical binders. Vivian was at the defense table, no longer in a power suit. She looked smaller, diminished, in a simple gray dress. Her new lawyer, a man whose suit cost more than my car, looked stressed. Brock Vale had dropped her the instant the criminal referral was filed. "Mr. Fletcher, you have the floor," Judge Lake said, her voice like gravel. "Thank you, Your Honor." Fletcher stood, a remote in his hand. The large screens above the jury box flickered to life. "The government will demonstrate a clear, calculated pattern of identity theft, bank fraud, wire fraud, perjury, and obstruction of justice." He clicked. The grainy black and white footage from Cafe Marigold filled the screen. "Your Honor, this is footage from October 31st. The woman at the window table is the defendant, Ms. Carlisle." He clicked again. A screenshot of the court's own IP log. At 7:42 p.m., from the IP address registered to this cafe, the fraudulent petition in her sister's name was filed. Vivian's lawyer, a man named Boris, stood. "Objection, Your Honor. This is circumstantial. My client's accounts, her very identity, were compromised by a sophisticated hacker. She was at that cafe, certainly, but she was the victim of a simultaneous digital attack. Her laptop was hacked." Fletcher gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. He didn't even turn around. "Your Honor, does a hacker also drink a 15-ounce non-fat lavender latte while sitting at the window table for 2 hours? As the video clearly shows, Ms. Carlisle doing, Judge Lake's expression did not change. Objection overruled. The hacker defense seems thin. Mr. Boris. Proceed. Mr. Fletcher. Fletcher clicked again. The screen now showed 2 images, side by side. On the left, Vivian's glamorous Instagram post, her hand on the steering wheel of her Range Star. The Solange Co., watch glittering. On the right, the asset schedule from my petition, showing only a $300 laptop. The defendant testified under oath at the 341 hearing that this watch was borrowed. That was perjury. He clicked. A new document, a high-resolution scan of a sales receipt from a local, high-end jeweler, item Solange Comte. Starlight model, price $18,900, purchaser Hale, Quinn. This, Fletcher said, his voice sharp, is the receipt for that watch. It was not borrowed. It was purchased by Quinn Hale, another victim from whom the defendant has stolen an estimated $30,000. This is not a mistake. This is a pattern. Boris was on his feet again. Your Honor, my client was simply at a business dinner during the filing. She cannot be held responsible for what a hacker did while she was networking. A business dinner? Fletcher asked, his voice full of polite curiosity. He motioned to the bailiff, who opened the side door. The government calls Mr. Anil Singh, the night manager for the Harbor Heights parking garage. A small man in a neat uniform walked to the stand and was sworn in. Fletcher. Mr. Singh, can you confirm your records for the evening of October 31st? Singh. Yes, sir. I have them. Fletcher. Do you show a record for a Range Star? License plate 4XL3VV. Singh. Yes, sir. The vehicle entered at 6:05 p.m. It exited at 7:28 p.m. Fletcher. And at 7:28 p.m. was payment rendered. Singh. Yes, sir. By credit card. The machine took a photo of the driver for security. Fletcher. Your Honor, I submit Government's Exhibit D. The screen changed. A grainy, time-stamped photo from the garage's exit kiosk. Vivian, in her Range Star, her face clearly visible, her hand reaching out with a credit card. The time 1928, 7:28 p.m. The Harbor Heights garage, Fletcher said to the room, is a 1-minute drive from the Café Marigold. The fraudulent petition was filed. From the cafe's IP address, just 14 minutes after the defendant paid for her parking. This was not a business dinner, Your Honor. This was the defendant securing her new, fraudulently obtained apartment, and then immediately driving to the cafe to file bankruptcy in her sister's name to cover her tracks. Mr. Boris was sinking in his chair. The defense, Judge Lake said, her voice ominous, is developing catastrophic leaks. Boris, left with no choice, played his only card. Your Honor, the defense calls Vivian Carlisle to the stand to clear up this web of digital coincidences. Vivian stood. She walked to the stand. Her composure was back, a mask of brittle indignation. She took the oath, swearing to God to tell the truth. Her eyes flicked across the gallery, searching. She saw me. Her gaze lingered for half a second, full of a cold, bottomless rage. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I simply lowered my gaze to the blank legal pad in my lap, as if she were nothing more than a passing distraction. Boris fumbled through a few soft questions, trying to paint her as a successful, misunderstood woman, targeted for her wealth. Then, Fletcher stood to cross-examine. Ms. Carlisle, he began, his voice calm. Let's talk about the creditors you listed on your sister's petition. Northbridge Financial, Harborstone Trust. Did you, at any time, communicate with these entities? No, Vivian said, her voice firm. I've never heard of them. So you never, for example, emailed them, pretending to be your sister? Emery Hernandez. Absolutely not. That's a ridiculous accusation. Is it? Fletcher held up a single sheet of paper. Your Honor, the government submits Exhibit E, a certified printout of an email, obtained under warrant. He placed it on the projector. The courtroom screens filled with text, from Emery, Hernandez, personal, to collections, Northbridge, calm subject, amicable settlement proposal. This, Fletcher said, is an email offering to settle a $90,000 debt for pennies on the dollar. An email you claim you never sent. Boris shot up. Objection. My client was hacked. That email address was part of the hack. An interesting theory. Counselor. Fletcher didn't miss a beat. He clicked his remote. A new image appeared. A server log. Then can you explain why the originating IP address for that email, sent on October 29th, was not from a hacker in Romania, but from 72.11.9.50? He let the number hang in the air. An IP address, Fletcher continued, his voice dropping, that our certified affidavit from the service provider confirms is registered, not to a cafe, not to a public space, but exclusively to the residential modem at the penthouse apartment in Harbor Heights, the very apartment the defendant had just leased in her sister's name. It was over. The click of the remote was the sound of the final nail. The hacker defense, the entire house of cards, had just evaporated. Vivian's face was white. She was staring at her lawyer, her mouth half open, as if she could not comprehend how the system had found her. Judge Lake, who had been listening with absolute stillness, leaned forward. The microphone hissed to life. "Mr. Boris," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, cutting through the silence. "Given the video from the cafe, the transactional data from the parking garage, the documented perjury from the 341 meeting, and now a certified IP log placing the fraudulent email inside the fraudulent apartment. Does your client wish to adjust her sworn testimony?" The silence in the room was a physical thing. It was heavy, dark, and suffocating. It was the sound of a life ending. Boris put his head in his hands. He whispered to Vivian. She was shaking her head, her eyes wild. "No, no. Tell them." He stood, his shoulders slumped. "Your Honor, the defense has no further comment at this time." "I see." Judge Lake nodded. "This court hereby temporarily suspends the civil bankruptcy proceedings of Case 25-140992 CWH. This court finds that there is overwhelming and incontrovertible probable cause to believe that the defendant, Ms. Carlisle, has committed multiple federal felonies. I am formally referring this entire matter for criminal prosecution, incorporating all evidence and testimony presented here today." The gavel felt like it was about to fall, but Fletcher held up a hand. "Your Honor, forgive me. The prosecution has one final motion regarding the scope of the criminal indictment." Judge Lake raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." "During the lawful search of the Harbor Heights residence, our agents recovered more than just luxury goods. We recovered applications. It seems Ms. Carlisle was not finished acquiring new lines of credit." He clicked the remote one last time. A new document filled the screens. It was a corporate application for a platinum credit card. "This application is in the name of her shell company, V. Carlisle Holdings," Fletcher explained. "But we were particularly interested in the personal guarantors she listed to secure the card." He zoomed in. The text became large, undeniable. Guarantor 1. Father's name. Father's SSN. Father's forged signature. Guarantor 2. Mother's name. Mother's SSN. Mother's forged signature. Vivian, who had been staring at the judge, slowly turned her head to the screen. "It appears," Fletcher said, his voice ringing with a cold, righteous anger, "that the defendant's list of victims was not limited to her sister or to Mr. Hale. She was actively stealing the identities of her own parents, leveraging their good credit to fund her next acquisition." A sound, a sharp, horrified gasp, from the benches directly behind me. I hadn't seen them come in. My parents. They were sitting in the last row. My father looked like he had been punched, his face slack and gray. My mother's hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes fixed on the screen, on her own name. Forged. Vivian saw them. For the first time, her mask of indignation didn't just crack. It shattered, a raw, animal sound of despair caught in her throat. And in that dead, awful silence, someone in the gallery fumbled a metal thermos. It dropped to the marble floor. The sound was a sharp, percussive, metallic crash, clang, clatter-skitter, that echoed off the high ceiling, loud as a gunshot, loud as a fire alarm. The crash of the thermos was not an ending, It was a detonation. Judge Lake's referral, made in the shocked silence that followed, was an order. The slow, grinding gears of the administrative process were over. The swift, sharp teeth of the criminal justice system were now bare. The montage of my sister's collapse began before we even left the courthouse. AUSA Fletcher, energized by the courtroom's revelations, secured an emergency seizure order from Judge Lake by 4 p.m. It was not a request. It was a surgical strike. The notification, a carbon copy for the victim file, appeared in my inbox as I was logging my final files for the day. Subject order, emergency asset seizure, 25 CR 901. By 5 p.m., federal marshals were not knocking on the door of the Riverton storage unit. They were cutting the lock with bolt cutters. The inventory list was emailed to the AUSA and copied to me. By 6, 9 unopened designer handbags, 4 additional luxury watches, a box containing $12,450 in unredeemed, high-value gift cards, all were tagged, bagged, and logged as evidence of fraud. By 5:30 p.m., a separate order had frozen the V. Carlisle Holdings, LLC bank account. The $60,000 she had siphoned from Harborstone Trust was now ice, locked pending criminal forfeiture. They seized the Range Star from the Harbor Heights garage. They seized the contents of the penthouse. And in a final, the quiet act of procedural closure, a marshal met her lawyer, Mr. Boris, in the courthouse lobby and collected the Solange Company watch directly from his hand. The concealment of assets was officially over. The peripheral elements, the soft accomplices from my wall diagram, fell next. They fell within 24 hours. AUSA Fletcher dispatched agents to the small offices of Sal Genna, the loan broker, and Rita Sands, the freelance accountant. They were not hardened criminals. They were professionals who had gotten greedy and lazy, who had taken cash from a charismatic client and agreed not to look too closely at the paperwork. They were not built for federal agents. They folded. Fletcher's summary email was blunt. Ms. Hernandez, both accomplices have provided full, cooperating statements in exchange for consideration. Sal Genna's sworn affidavit was attached. I never met the applicant, Emery Hernandez. Vivian Carlisle gave me the financial package. She said it was for a silent partner, and she just needed the income verification pushed through fast for a lease. She paid me $500 in cash. I just edited the FICO score in the system and signed the verification form. I thought it was just a simple bend of the rules. Rita Sands, the accountant, was even more helpful. She was terrified of losing her license. She didn't just talk. She emailed. She sent the investigators her entire client file on Vivian, including the original draft of the liquidation scenario memo she had prepared 3 months prior. It was a spreadsheet. It detailed, step by step, how to leverage a clean identity to secure high-value loans, how to structure the asset purchases through a shell LLC, and, in a horrifyingly precise note in the margin, the best-case scenario for discharge via Chapter 7, keeping personal assets below the exemption threshold to avoid trustee scrutiny. She had even added a handwritten note for Vivian. Keep all individual luxury items valued under $20,000 to avoid the mandatory reporting trigger. Vivian hadn't just committed fraud. She had commissioned a blueprint for it. AUSA Fletcher now held an ironclad case. The video from the cafe, the IP logs from the apartment, the audio of her confession at dinner, the seized assets from the storage unit, and now, the sworn cooperating testimony of both her accomplices. He made the offer. It was, I was told, a standard explode on acceptance plea. The email from Fletcher was a model of detached efficiency. We have extended a formal plea agreement to Ms. Carlisle. She will plead guilty to 1 count of bank fraud, 1 count of aggravated identity theft, and 1 count of perjury. In exchange, the government will recommend a sentence at the low end of the federal guidelines, which we calculate at 60 months. We will agree to drop the remaining obstruction and wire fraud charges. If she refuses this offer and elects to proceed to a trial she cannot win, we will pursue all available charges. including the new counts related to the identity theft of her parents, and will recommend the maximum statutory sentence. The choice was simple: 5 years or 25. The pressure of that choice, of the cold, hard numbers, sent the shockwaves back to me. The first attempt was official. An agent from the AUSA's investigative team called my personal cell. "Ms. Hernandez, this is Agent Davies. I'm with the defendant's counsel at his office. The defendant, Ms. Carlyle, She is extremely insistent that she be allowed to speak with you. We are advising against any contact, but as the victim, we are required to communicate the request. Do you consent to a monitored, recorded phone call?" I stood in my quiet apartment, looking at the wall of sticky notes. The protocol was my shield. "No, Agent Davies, I do not consent. Please adhere to protocol. All communication must be directed through counsel." "Understood. Ms. Hernandez." The line clicked. The second attempt, later that night, was not so formal. It was just after 9 p.m. A knock on my apartment door. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a frantic, heavy banging that vibrated the cheap wood of the door. I looked through the peephole. My parents. My father's face was a mask of gray, slack-jawed defeat. My mother was actively weeping, her face splotchy and red, her hair a mess. I took a breath. I unhooked the deadbolt. I opened the door only as far as the security chain would allow. A gap of 3 inches. Cold air from the hallway rushed in, smelling of industrial cleaner. "Emery," my mother cried, her voice breaking. She pushed against the door, her fingers appearing in the small gap. "Emery, thank God. You have to listen to me. You have to stop this." "There is nothing to stop," I said. My voice was flat, without inflection. "Don't say that." My father's voice was a low, angry growl. He was shaking. We just came from Vivian's lawyer. They're talking about prison. Emery, prison. For years. This is a mistake. It's just paper. It's just numbers." "She stole your identities," I said, my voice as cold as the hallway. "She forged your names." "That was a misunderstanding," my mother shrieked, her hand grasping at the air. At me. "She was setting up a family fund. She told us she was going to surprise us. We told the prosecutor we don't want to press charges. This is a family matter. Emery, we will make a private arrangement. We'll pay the money back, whatever it is. We'll get a loan. We'll pay it. You just have to tell them to drop it. Please." The old words, the poison, family matter, private arrangement, be flexible. The code words for my silence, the tools for my submission. I looked at my mother's desperate, grasping fingers in the gap. I looked at my father's face, broken not by his daughter's crime, but by the public consequence of it. They were not defending me. They were defending the facade. "No," I said. "Emery, I am begging you." My mother sobbed, her palm flat against the door. "No." I pushed the heavy door closed. The chain rattled as it pulled taut, then went slack. The deadbolt slid into place with a solid, heavy, final thud. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, listening to the muffled, desperate sobbing on the other side. It lasted for a full minute, then faded down the hall. I did not cry. I simply went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea. The plea hearing was scheduled. The local newspaper, finally unshackled from pending investigation protocols, ran the story. Local consultant to plead guilty in luxury debt bankruptcy scheme. This time, they used her name, Vivian Carlyle. They detailed the entire plot: the fraudulent bankruptcy petition, the aggravated identity theft, the hidden assets in the Riverton storage unit, the conspiracy with the accountant. I read the article over my morning coffee. I scanned the text. My name was nowhere. I was a close relative. I was an employee of the federal court, whose position gave her the unique insight to first spot the fraudulent filing. I was protected by victim privacy rules. I was, as I had always been, anonymous. I finished my coffee. I went to work. I clocked in at 8:01 a.m. My supervisor gave me a look of deep, unspoken sympathy, but said nothing. The file in my inbox was Inree Johnson. Chapter 13. Motion to Compel. I reviewed the debtor's payment history. I checked the trustee's recommendation. I pulled the cover sheet. I inked my stamp. Clack. I pulled the next file. Clack. The routine was my armor. The simple, binary, right or wrong, filed or not filed rhythm of the docket kept me breathing. The world outside my cubicle was a chaotic, emotional inferno. But in here, there was only the procedure, and the procedure was clean. The night before the plea and sentencing hearing, I sat at my small desk at home. I looked at my personal cell phone. The cheap, clear plastic case was scarred and scratched, the corners chipped and yellowed. It was the case that had been on it for the last 3 months, the case I had gripped as I took screenshots, as I made the audio recording, as I gathered the digital fragments of her crime. I pulled the old case off. It creaked and snapped. I wiped the phone clean on my shirt. I took a new case from its box, a simple, smooth, black one. I snapped it on. It was clean. It was finished. I walked to my evidence wall, the sticky notes, the red for motive, the yellow for method, the green for evidence, one by one. I pulled them down. I did not throw them away. I stacked them in a neat, colorful pile. I unlocked my small metal box. I placed the stack of notes inside, on top of the USB drive labeled Hernandez Car Viva 1. I closed the lid. I locked it. The next morning, I took the box to work. I did not take it to my desk. I went to the employee locker room on the 5th floor. I placed the box inside my personal locker, number 42. I put a small, heavy padlock on the door. My personal casebook was closed. That night, I slept. I slept for 8 solid hours, a deep, black, dreamless sleep. It was the first true rest I'd had since the email alert. I woke at 5:30 a.m. It was raining, not a quiet drizzle, but a cold, driving, December rain that sheeted against my windows. The sound of the world being scoured clean, washing the chalk outlines from the pavement. I showered. I dressed in my best black blazer and a simple white shirt. I did not eat. I walked the 6 blocks to the courthouse, my umbrella bending against the wind. The great marble steps were dark, wet, and reflective. I entered courtroom 12B at 9:50 a.m. I sat in my seat, 3rd row, on the left. The room smelled the same. Old, polished wood and aging paper. I placed my hands on my lap. I was not nervous. I was not angry. I was not sad. I was not anything. My heart was cold, and it was straight. I was a clerk, here to observe the final docketing of a case. Judge Miriam Lake entered courtroom 12B at precisely 10:04 a.m. The room was not full, but the silence was absolute, heavier than the dark mahogany that paneled the walls. The only sound was the incessant, cold drumming of the rain against the tall, arched windows. Vivian was already seated at the defense table. She looked like a ghost, a faded charcoal sketch of the vibrant predator from my dining room. Her expensive lawyer, Mr. Boris, sat beside her, his face grim, his hands clasped on top of a single, thin file. The plea was already entered. This was only the sentencing. I saw my parents in the last row, huddled together near the center aisle. They looked like they had aged a decade in a month. They were not here to support me. They were here as mourners for the life their other daughter had just forfeited. I was in my seat, 3rd row, on the left. I wore my black blazer. My hands were folded in my lap. "The court is in session," Judge Lake began, her voice cutting through the hiss of the rain. "We are here for sentencing in Case 25 CR 901, United States v. Carlisle. The defendant has entered a plea of guilty to Count 1, bank fraud, Count 3, aggravated identity theft, and Count 7, perjury. Mr. Fletcher." The government's summary. AUSA Fletcher stood. He was not triumphant. He was a functionary, like me, presenting his final report. "Thank you, Your Honor." He walked to the lectern. though he needed no notes. What the government's evidence has shown, and what the defendant's plea now confirms, is not a simple mistake. It was not a single, desperate act. It was a cold, calculated, and predatory criminal campaign. He raised a hand, ticking off the points. The defendant executed a sophisticated scheme to defraud creditors and financial institutions of more than $180,000. She did this by systematically stealing the identities of at least 4 separate victims, including her own sister, her own father, and her own mother. My parents flinched. A single, sharp, unified motion. She weaponized her sister's good name, the name of a public servant in this very courthouse, to secure a luxury penthouse apartment she could not afford. She then attempted to wipe the slate clean by filing a fraudulent bankruptcy petition, a petition filled with dozens of material falsehoods, any one of which would constitute a felony. He paused, looking at the judge. When this fraud was discovered, she did not stop. She committed brazen perjury at the 341 meeting of creditors. She attempted to conceal assets. She submitted false documents to this very court in an effort to obstruct the proceedings. This was not desperation, Your Honor. This was arrogance. This was an expression of contempt for the law, and for the victims she believed were beneath her. The government asks that the court sentence her in accordance with the guidelines, reflecting the profound and malicious nature of these crimes. Fletcher sat down. The room was deathly quiet. Judge Lake turned her gaze to the defense table. Mr. Boris. Boris stood, his movements heavy. He looked at his notes, then at the judge. Your Honor, my client, Ms. Carlyle. She understands the gravity of her actions. She has admitted her guilt. But this was not an act born of contempt. It was, as the government noted, an act of desperation. He fumbled, searching for the right words. Ms. Carlyle was under profound and unrelenting family pressure. Pressure to succeed, to maintain a certain standard of living, to be the resourceful one, as her family has always called her. I felt the blood drain from my face. He was using their word, our word. This pressure, Boris continued, his voice rising slightly, led to a severe mental and emotional breakdown. It was in this state of panic, of a full-blown depressive spiral, that she made these catastrophic errors in judgment. She asks for the court's mercy, for a sentence that favors rehabilitation, not just punishment. Judge Lake listened, her face impassive. When Boris finished, she did not speak for a long time. She simply looked at a file on her desk. Finally, she looked up. A mental breakdown. Mr. Boris, she asked, her voice dangerously soft. Boris nodded. Yes, Your Honor, a depressive spiral. I see. Judge Lake lifted a thin file, the one he had submitted. Because I have your client's medical and psychiatric records right here, submitted by the defense. They show 2 visits to a therapist for mild anxiety. They also show 3 new prescriptions for vitamin D. She closed that file and picked up another, thicker one. And I have the government's financial exhibits. They show that during this same depressive spiral, your client had the presence of mind to hire an accountant to draft a liquidation scenario, to lease a luxury car, to open a shell corporation, to transfer $60,000 to an offshore account, and to purchase, in cash, over $12,000 in gift cards. Her grief, it seems, was highly organized. Boris sat down. He did not have a reply. The family pressure defense is thin, Counselor, Judge Lake said, her voice turning to steel. The only pressure this court can see is the pressure Ms. Carlyle applied to her victims. The only breakdown is the one she inflicted on her sister's financial life and her parents' trust. Vivian, who had been staring at her hands, snapped her head up. She looked around the courtroom, her eyes wide. She looked at the empty jury box. She looked at the reporters in the gallery. She was, for the first time, realizing that her audience was gone. Her charisma was useless here. Her looks, her charm, Her Instagram following, they held no currency in courtroom 12B. There was only the docket. There was only the truth. Judge Lake's gaze settled on her. Ms. Carlyle, you have pled guilty to 3 serious federal felonies. Before this court imposes its sentence, I will ask you one final time. Is there anything you wish to say? This was it. The moment for remorse. The moment to turn to me. The moment to look at her parents. The moment to say, I'm sorry. The courtroom held its breath. Vivian turned her head. She looked over her shoulder, her eyes finding mine in the 3rd row. Her face was not soft. It was not apologetic. It was a mask of cold. Pure, undiluted hatred. She was not sorry for what she did. She was furious that I had not allowed her to get away with it. She held my gaze for a full 5 seconds. Then, she turned back to the judge. She pressed her lips together into a thin, white, bloodless line. No, Your Honor, she whispered. I have nothing to say. Judge Lake nodded once, a sharp, final gesture. So be it. She reached for the wooden gavel. She lifted it. The room seemed to grow darker. Vivian Carlyle, on the counts to which you have pled guilty, this court sentences you to a combined, aggregate term of 60 months in federal prison. A sound, a terrible, tearing sound, like an animal in a trap. It came from the back row. My mother. Her hands were covering her face, her shoulders shaking. Judge Lake did not pause. Her voice was the sound of the machine. It is further ordered that you will pay full restitution to the victims in the amount of $183,400. It is further ordered that all assets seized by the government from the Riverton Storage Unit and the V. Carlyle Holdings account are hereby forfeited. It is further ordered that you are banned, for life, from ever again working in any profession with fiduciary or financial responsibility. This is the sentence of the court. She held the gavel high, in the dead, ringing silence of the room, and brought it down. Clack. The sound was sharp, dry, and absolute. It was the sound of a period at the end of a very long sentence. It was the sound of my date stamp. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut. It was the sound that cut through every lie, every excuse, every whispered plea for flexibility that had defined my entire life. This court stands adjourned. Judge Lake stood and was gone before the echoes of the gavel had faded. Vivian sat motionless, staring at the empty bench. Mr. Boris put his head in his hands. A U.S. Marshal, who had been standing by the wall, stepped forward. He was a large man, but his movements were quiet, almost gentle. Ms. Carlyle, please stand. She stood, her body moving with the jerky, unnatural motions of a marionette. Place your hands behind your back. Please. She did. The marshal took the handcuffs from his belt. They were not bright, like on television. They were dull, brushed steel. They were instruments. He brought her left wrist back. He clicked the first cuff into place. Sh-click. He brought her right wrist back. Sh-click. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom, the cheap, buzzing lights of a government building, reflected for a moment in the cold, curved metal. The marshal put a hand on her elbow. This way, ma'am. He began to lead her toward the side door. The one that led to the elevators. The one that led to the basement. The one that led to the transport van. And she turned. She looked back, over her shoulder, her eyes frantic, scanning the gallery. She was looking for one last miracle, for the person who was supposed to fix this, for the person who had always been told to be flexible, to bend, to break, so that she could remain whole. Her eyes found mine. It was a raw, silent, terrible plea. The golden child, the resourceful one, the star of the family, finally, utterly broken. Her eyes begged me, do something, stamp the file, make it stop, save me, Emery, save me. I did not look up. My hands were resting on the blank legal pad in my lap. My gaze was fixed on the cover. I was as still as the dark water at Stilling Pond. I was just a woman in a black blazer, in the 3rd row, watching the docket clear, The marshal guided her through the door. I heard my mother let out a final, broken wail. I looked back. My father was holding her, his own face gray, his eyes hollow. They were just old, and they were silent. No one was saying the word flexible. No one was saying family matter. The words had lost their power. I turned forward again. I took in a breath, a slow, deep breath that filled my lungs for the first time in months. My chest did not feel heavy. It did not feel light. It felt empty, in a clean way. The way a desk feels after the last file has been stamped. It was the simple, profound feeling of a task completed. The heavy wooden door to the holding area swung shut. The old, unoiled hinge gave one last, high-pitched, weary squeak, the sound of a final, closed parenthesis. The end of the con. I stood up. I adjusted my blazer. I walked out of courtroom 12B, my shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. I did not go to the lobby. I took the staff elevator down, to the 6th floor. I walked through the quiet rows of gray cubicles. I sat at my desk. My in-tray was full. A day's work, waiting. I turned on my small desk lamp. I pulled the first file toward me. In Re Michelson. Chapter 13. Notice of Default. I read the trustee's report. I checked the dates on the cover sheet. I opened my drawer. I picked up my heavy black date stamp. I pressed it into the red ink pad. I brought it down on the paper. Clack. I was just doing my job. I glanced out the window of the clerk's office. The rain had stopped. A single, thin, watery shaft of sunlight had broken through the gray clouds, striking the wet marble of the plaza far below, making it shine with a cold, clean light. There was no triumphant swell of music. There was no victory. There was only compliance, and that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. Subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it some extra love by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story.